again. This is Politics by Jake. Welcome to the show. This is the episode for the 26th of September. It's 7 a.m. or thereabouts. And Politics by Jake, of course, I'm your host and your commentarist. And it is a bi-weekly, Monday and Friday at 7 a.m. And we talk about political education. We talk about how history is so important in that. And you've heard me say before, and those of you who are new to the show will not obviously have heard me say it before, that history is in its own way as important as quantum physics. History is the queen, the veritable queen of all the sciences, because it's the history of everything, including quantum physics. And getting back to the main point, it's important because if something comes upon you in the course of your present day life and you cannot recognize it as something that has already happened before, and you cannot refer to it and see what it is that happened when it cycled around again, because things cycle in the history of the world, you will not recognize it for what it is. And if it is a devastating and an unfortunate and an unpleasant episode in the history of the world, you will be forced to live it again. And you may lose your quantum physics. It's happened before. Now, I want to read with you, this is funny too. I want to read to you from an op-ed. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's from a columnist that, I don't like him. He's David Brooks. He's with the New York Times. The New York Times is one of those members of the corrupt, controlled corporate media. And I don't just say that. I say that because it fits these media outlets. They're owned by billionaire oligarchs, and they don't express things that they ought to express. They don't tell the sides of the story that they ought to tell, which is why it's important to have alternative digital sources, media sources like Politics by Jake that will tell you these things. But he wrote this thing, and occasionally, it's like the old saying, even a blind squirrel finds a few nuts every once in a while, and even a broken clock is right twice a day. So this is what he said. And this is something coming from him. Trumpism, and I'm quoting now, is primarily about the acquisition of power for its own sake. It is a multi-front assault to make the earth a playground for ruthless men. So, of course, any institutions that might restrain power, and this is me talking power of that type, and this is him talking again, must be weakened or destroyed. I repeat, must be weakened or destroyed. Trumpism is about ego. It's about appetite and acquisitiveness, and is driven by a primal aversion to the higher elements of the human spirit, such as learning, such as compassion, such as scientific wonder, such as the pursuit of justice. And he says, what is happening now is not normal politics. We're seeing assault on the fundamental institutions of our civic life, things we should all swear loyalty to, regardless of whether we are Democrat, Independent, or Republican. And he says it's time for a comprehensive national civic uprising. It's time for Americans in universities, in law, and business. Those last two are me, by the way, law and business. Nonprofits, the scientific community, and civil servants, and beyond, to form one coordinated mass movement. Trump is about power. The only way he's going to be stopped is if he's confronted by some movement that possesses rival power. And he says, I'm really not a movement guy. I don't naturally march in demonstrations or attend rallies. That I'm not covering as a journalist. But this is what America needs right now. And thank you, David. I agree with that 100%. And of course, this is one of the main messages of our show. And it's not that I don't like to talk about it, but there are many things to talk about that could be talked about it. And people don't like to say this. We all like to think that our lives are just going on and that everything is all right. And somehow everything is going to be all right. But everything is not all right. A fascist cabal, and you hear me use this phrase again and again and again, and I say it again, a fascist cabal, headed right now by Donald Trump. There are more dangerous ones behind him, I assure you. He is comparatively, honestly, he's kind of a doofus. And when I say doofus, I mean by that a comparatively simple man to understand. They have gained power in the United States, and they've done so illegally. They've gained power over the executive branch. And you've heard me talk about that. It's the 14th Amendment, one of the Reconstruction amendments that are known, the 13th, 14th, and 15th, are known as the new birth of freedom. And Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says that if you've committed insurrection against the United States, you can't be elected to any office, whether state or whether federal. And the Supreme Court, in the case of Anderson versus Trump, or Trump versus Anderson, neatly sidestepped that. And I'm not going to go into that now because it's more the nonsense of the Supreme Court, that supremely corrupt organization. But I've gone into it before, and I will go through it again. But he can't. He's unable to be in the office that he was elected to. It doesn't matter if he's elected. The 14th Amendment completely proscribes this. He can't be president. He's in there illegally. The entire administration is in there illegally because of the new birth of freedom embodied partly in the 14th Amendment, Section 3. And by the way, when I say Trump is a doofus, he's a dangerous, dangerous person. He's a man-child. I have talked on the show and referred to the time when, I believe it was in 2015 or 2016, when he was campaigning for the presidency the first time. And at a rally, he said this. He said, all of my life, all I knew is that I wanted to get as much as I could. And when he said that, he raised his arms and he made these grabbing motions, which is that he had his hands wide open and that his arms were raised at about the elbows, and he started moving his hands back and forth towards each other, towards his chest, in a grabbing motion, you see? And that's what I'm trying to explain to you. And he did that repeatedly, and he said, all I knew was that I wanted to get all that I could get, all that I could get, all that I could get. And there are others in the world who are like this also. And you have to understand that this is their motivation. It's comparatively simple, and it's so simple that you may want to overthink it. You may want to say, oh, well, surely they are possessed of a political philosophy which we do not understand, but in their depth and because no, not because of their money. They want money because of money. There is no political philosophy. As David Brooks said, it's about acquisitiveness. It's about money, and it's about power. Power for its own sake. Not to do good, not to perpetuate the nation, but to use it as a cash machine. And when I refer to the Supreme Court, by the way, lest I leave that body august, shall I say august? I don't know. That decrepit, that corrupt body, that corrupt organization, provably corrupt, at which everybody winks. And this is one of the reasons why I say, and this is one of the reasons why I repeat this stuff. I'm referring to not only Samuel Alito, who flies the American flag upside down at his summer homes, among other things that could be said, and believes that the privileged class has lost their privileges and we need to get the privileges of the privileged class back. And Clarence Thomas, who, what could I say about Clarence Thomas except that he's just corrupt? He's on the take. And the worst part about it, see, this would be bad enough. It would be bad enough, for example, to say that Clarence Thomas is on the take, because he is on the take. But he sits and will not recuse himself, and recusal is when you remove yourself from a matter. To recuse yourself is basically to remove. It's an interesting word. You could just say, well, removal, but now the word's recusal. And he will not recuse himself from cases on which business of the court is before the Supreme Court, and the parties have given him money. One of the parties have given him money, or they've given him largesse, or they've given him entitlement, or something like that. You can't do that. That's a violation of the Code of Ethics. Of course, the Supreme Court has no specific code of ethics. You always want to assume that A, being accomplished jurists of many years, they know the rules of ethics in the lower courts that they served in, and B, that they're just using the ordinary federal rules on that. But there is no codified, embodied rule book as far as ethics is concerned for the Supreme Court. I don't like John Roberts either. He's definitely suspect. He was a $5 million a year corporate lawyer before he was elevated to, and not just an associate justice, which would have been estimable enough to be elevated to the Supreme Court as an associate justice. No, he was elevated as the Chief Justice. So you have to look at these things. And I know you don't see these things because I know things are getting bad. They're using the federal government as a cash machine. Programs are drying up. This is one of the reasons why the Democrats are trying to force a showdown with the Republicans to claw back, for example, some of the 800, and hopefully it would be all of it, but we'll see, some of the $880 million, $880 billion, which over 10 years is going to be excised from programs like Medicare, from programs like Medicaid. Medicaid, certainly. And you're seeing it. Businesses are shutting down. There's a great illusion going on. I'm going to go into that later in the show. There's a great illusion of normalcy going on. But if you look around you, you see it. One of the reasons I'm here is to call that out continually so that you never forget it. And to urge you, as David Brooks did, to do a mass civic uprising. Because people like Trump, and there are others like him, all they understand is power. They understand money, and they understand power. The commandant of the Berlin garrison in 1945 and again in 1961 counseled and advised President John F. Kennedy and said this: the Russians, and I don't think he said the Soviets, and I don't think he said the communists, I think he said the Russians, only understand power. And in order to work with them, you have to assert, and I'm paraphrasing now, you have to have and assert and show an ability and a desire to assert your power against them. This is the only way that they can be controlled. And let's not go into the psychology of the Russians. This is the only way they can be controlled. It's the only way there can be peace. If you do not have this, you're going to lose and they're going to walk all over you. And Putin's doctrine, the doctrine of Duginism, sometimes called the doctrine of Eurasianism, the doctrine of, it's called Duginism because of the person who is kind of the brain trust, kind of the power behind the throne on that. Putin's brain, Alexander Dugin. It's called Eurasianism because one of the things that it dictates is that Russia needs to become a continental power. And it needs to be a continental power in the sense that it spans from one sea to another. And we know that they got the Pacific. What's the other sea, do you think? Well, it's the Atlantic. And that's right. And it's always been that way. Stalin wanted to go to Paris. And let's take a break now. Let's have a couple of commercials. We will be back. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. This is Jake, here to tell you the world is on fire, only you're not being told who actually lit the match. Politics by Jake, Mondays and Fridays at 7 a.m. on KCAA. All right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. And I wanted to talk about the Charlie Kirk killing. There's some interesting things about that. I was listening to Michael Savage the other day, and it's interesting because you know who I am. You understand the kind of show that I do. But I listen to other guys, and I was listening to Michael Savage the other day talking about how he was suspicious about the description that is being given as to why Charlie Kirk was killed. And I think that it's bona fide. He was talking about the fact that the assassin used a certain kind of a gun that does not disassemble very easily. He talked about how the barrel had to be taken off and how you have this unlikely scenario. And I don't want to recommend you to Michael Savage, to the likes of Michael Savage, but this is good. Michael Savage, just like I do as a commentator and like my colleagues and like us all and like David Brooks, we have to have a mass civic uprising and show forth our power. That's just the way it's got to be. It has to be that way. And so in the spirit of that, this is why I talk about that. But he said, how likely is it that an assassin on the run could take a gun that was that significant and depart the scene without getting caught, without being encumbered? And apparently the gun was found in the woods and the barrel was not disassembled from the stock. So that's pretty interesting. But one of the things that has happened, there's an old saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. And since the time of the Charlie Kirk assassination, or whatever it was, murder, whatever it was, if you don't want to elevate it to the level of an assassination, the Trump administration and fellow travelers have been doing all that they could in order to hit this. They're even preaching their version of the gospel. And if I have a little time on the show today, I'll talk about that, because I do talk about religion sometimes, because this is a movement that wants to fuse religion and secular government. They want them to be part of the same. They don't want to have freedom of religion. They don't want to have freedom from religion. They want to impose a certain kind, a certain brand of the Christian religion. And of course, there are many sects. I think it states in the Bible somewhere that there's no unity of the faith. That's true. It was true then. It's true now. And thanks to the Bill of Rights, you don't have to believe in a certain thing. You can believe in a yellow dog if you want, or you can worship a tree if you want. There is no law with regarding religion in that way. But there is an inseparable wall, as I think it was George Washington who stated in a letter that I've got laying around somewhere as I'm speaking to you now. I haven't referenced, but it does exist, talking about an inseparable wall between religion and between the secular state, and the reason why. Because of all the barbarities and all the horrors and all the blood and all the terror that was imposed upon the human race since the dawn of recorded history, probably, because of religion and because of the attempt to fuse religion with the power of the state. You have Pope Gelasius in, I think it was the 400s, with his famous Duo Sunt encyclical. And Duo Sunt is Latin. It means two. There are two. There's the power of the state and there's the power of religion. Sometimes they act together, but they're separate. They don't fuse. So, in other words, what they've been doing since this time is they've been elevating Charlie Kirk to something like a saint, Saint Charlie of Kirk. And I was thinking back in history, and I was thinking back to Nazi Germany, and you had a couple of examples of this where it was pure, and it was purely performative. It was pure propaganda where, and I'm not equating the people that I'm about to talk about with Charlie Kirk, I'm equating what was done with regard to them and their murders or assassinations as being similar to what's happened with the Charlie Kirk murder, and I'm equating it to the Nazi regime and the propaganda that they used. And I'm trying to draw a comparison here. So, all right, let's talk about Reinhard Heydrich. Now, this was the bad guy. He was a high-ranking German SS and police official during the Nazi era, principal architect of the Holocaust. He was at the Wannsee conference, at which the details of the Holocaust, the final solution, were talked about. There's a great movie about that. He held the rank of SS Obergruppenführer and General de Polizei, which means he was an Obergruppenführer, means overgroup Führer. So he was the head of an entire SS group. And General de Polizei means he was the general of the police. And many historians, and once again, I rush to state that I am not comparing Reinhard Heydrich to Charlie Kirk. I am comparing what the Nazi regime, using Heydrich as an example, and Rommel as an example, who was a German general, and I'll talk about him in a minute. I'm comparing how they handled the situation. I am not equating Charlie Kirk, who is a mere commentator. He's a propagandist, but he's just a commentator. But Heydrich was chief of the Reich Security Main Office, and this included, this was a big guy. This included the Gestapo, it included the Kripo, and the SD. He was also a stellvertretender Reichsprotektor. Big title, big guy. What that means in English is Deputy Acting Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia. He served as the president of the International Criminal Police Commission. This is now known as Interpol, by the way. You've probably heard that. And he chaired, as I said, the January 1942 Wannsee Conference, which "say" means see, the Wannsee Conference, which formalized plans for the final solution to the Jewish question, which was nothing more and nothing less than the deportation and genocide of all Jews in German-occupied France. He was the founding head of the Sicherheitsdienst, which is the security service, that's the SD that I mentioned before, an intelligence organization charged with seeking out and neutralizing resistance to the Nazi Party via arrests, deportations, and murders. He helped organize Kristallnacht, or Crystal Night, series of coordinated attacks against the Jews through Nazi Germany and parts of Austria on the 9th and 10th of November 1938, which is why we call ICE the ICE Gestapo, because it is nothing less than what they are doing. The attacks were carried out by SA stormtroopers. Sturm, SA stands for Sturmabteilung. Sturm is storm, A stands for Abteilung, and Abteilung is just a detail. So the storm detail, it calls the stormtroopers here, and civilians and presaged the Holocaust. You are seeing this in this country now. Talked about it on the last show. A lot of people are talking about it. On his arrival in Prague, Heydrich sought to eliminate opposition to the Nazi occupation by suppressing Czech culture and deporting and executing members of the Czech resistance. He was directly responsible for the Einsatzgruppen, special task forces that traveled in the wake of the German armies after the German armies conquered an area. The Einsatzgruppen went in and just killed people, just mass shooting, gassing, and this included 1.3 million Jews. And what happened to him, he was mortally wounded in Prague on the 27th of May, 1942, as a result of Operation Anthropoid. He was ambushed by a team of Czech and Slovak soldiers who had been sent by the Czechoslovakian government in exile to kill him. The team was trained by the British Special Operations executives, and he died from this. He didn't die right away, but he died from his injuries a few days later, June 4th, 1942. Nazi intelligence falsely linked the Czech and Slovak soldiers and resistance partisans to the village of Lidice and Ležáky. Both villages were razed. Men and boys aged 14 and above were shot and most of the women and children were deported and murdered in Nazi concentration camps. So, okay, this gives you an idea of what he was. And again, I hasten to state that comparatively, Charlie Kirk is a mere propagandist. He's a mere commentator. He did not commit the acts that Reinhard Heydrich committed. So we want to be just completely clear on this. But it's about what they did after he died. And what was done is that there was an elaborate funeral held in Prague on June 7th, 1942. Heydrich's coffin was placed on a train to Berlin, where a second ceremony was held in the new Reichschancellery on June 9th. Himmler gave the eulogy, Hitler attended, placed Heydrich's decorations, including the highest grade of the German Order, the Blood Order Medal, the Wound Badge in gold, the War Merit Cross, first class with swords, on his funeral pillow. He was interred in Berlin's Invalidenfriedhof, which is a military cemetery. And this is what was done. And this is exactly what was done with Charlie Kirk. In the same tone, he was treated as a saint. Like I say, Saint Charlie of Kirk, as some commentators have jokingly called him. This is right out of the Nazi playbook, and it's really great as far as the Trump regime is concerned. And regime, when you talk about a regime, the implication when you use the word regime is that they're not legitimate. They're a regime. They're not a legitimate government, and they're not. Again, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Go ahead and read it. I have spoken at length about it on other shows. Will do so again, but please just refer to that yourself so that you can put up to date. No one who commits insurrection can be elected to any state or public office, state or federal office. Go look at the case from the Colorado Supreme Court entitled Griswold v. Anderson. An excellent explanation, just excellent. It's a little long. You might want to give yourself some time if you're going to read that. It talks about what an insurrection is. It distinguishes insurrection from rebellion. It's excellent. And it found Trump absolutely, positively guilty of committing insurrection against the United States. And I would add, both violent and legislative, because he tried to overthrow the government by violence, and he also tried to overthrow the government legislatively by trying to challenge the results of the Electoral College. And of course, he still talks about this, because he's a man-child. He's surrounded by people who treat him as if he was a dictator or a Führer. He's not impervious, though. And we've talked about that before, and maybe we'll have a chance to just briefly mention that again. Something that he said to Pam Bondi, his corrupt attorney general from the state of Florida, who we have talked about in the Kakistocracy Corner. Okay, so the point here is that this is what they did. Erwin Rommel was a great, as you may call him great, he's a well-known German general of World War II. He was called the Desert Fox because of what he did in Africa. It was eventually defeated by Montgomery. But it is said that he played a role in the military's resistance against Hitler. And this is part of the July 20th, 1944 plot. And it's difficult to ascertain. Most of the leaders who are directly involved did not survive. And there's limited documentation on the conspirators' plans and preparations. But one piece of evidence points out, but in other words, the idea is that Rommel was involved, and that Rommel came to support the assassination. He made a confession to General Eberbach's son, which was eavesdropped on, by the way, by British agencies while in British captivity, which stated that Rommel explicitly said to him that Hitler and his close associates had to be killed because this would be the only way out for Germany. And this conversation occurred about a month before Rommel was coerced into suicide. Other notable evidence includes the papers of Rudolf Hartmann, who survived the purge, actually, and he was among other leaders of the military resistance. And these papers were accidentally discovered, interestingly, by historian Christian Schweitzer in 2018. He was doing research on Rudolf Hartmann, including Hartmann's eyewitness account of a conversation between Rommel and Stülpnagel in May 1944, as well as photos of the mid-May 1944 meeting between the inner circle of the resistance and Rommel at Kosman's house. According to Hartmann, at the end of May, in another meeting at Hartmann's quarters in Marly, Rommel showed decisive determination, clear approval of the inner circle's plan. So more could be said, but Rommel wanted the Nazi leaders assassinated, and he wanted them killed. Okay. So this was turned over to a court of military honor, which is kind of a drumhead court-martial. It was convened to decide the fate of officers involved in the conspiracy, and he was he wanted they wanted Rommel killed, and so they felt he was a traitor, and so two generals from Hitler's headquarters visited Rommel at his home on 14th October 1944. Bergdorf was one of them, Wilhelm Bergdorf, informed him of the charges against him, offered him three options. Number one, he could choose to defend himself personally in front of Hitler. He could refuse to do that, but having done so, that would be taken as an admission of his guilt. And number two, he could face the People's Court, which would have been tantamount to a death sentence. The People's Court is something we ought to talk about sometime. We won't talk about it now, but it was really bad. Or he could choose death by suicide. He would, and in this case, the government would claim that he died a hero, bury him with full military honors, and his family would receive full pension payments. And conveniently, in support of the suicide option, Bergdorf just happened to have brought a cyanide capsule. And Rommel chose suicide. And to make a long story short, he was buried, he was honored at a state funeral. This is the exact, and Rommel, Charlie Kirk is a commentator. He's a mere commentator. He's a mere propagandist. And I do not discount these facts with him, nor the onus or the burden of the things that he said. But he was a German war general. He wasn't at the Wannsee Conference in 1942 working on the final solution, although it's kind of arguable in a way. I talked about that on the last show, but we're not going to really get into that. But it's how the Nazi regime chose to look at this. And it's how the Trump regime has chosen to look at this. And this is my point. The Trump regime, like the Nazi regime, the Hitler regime, chose to give him a great funeral, chose to give him military honors, because the regime has to portray these things in this estimable and laudable light. It's all performative. It's all propaganda. And at this point, let's take another break, and we will be back after that. And this is Politics by Jake, and we'll be right back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake. Do you like what you hear right now? Support the real talk then. Go to patreon.com/Politics by Jake right now. Every dollar helps fight the noise. And this is Politics by Jake, and thank you for those commercial messages, and we will be back. Thank you, Twain Consulting. And we are back. So, all right. We have a situation, this is kind of an amazing situation, I think you would have to agree, where guess who's back on the air? Jimmy Kimmel. He's back on the air. I haven't talked about this because, it's 1 week. As I said a couple of days ago on the show, 1 week it's Jimmy Kimmel. The next week it's Epstein. The next week it's the homeless. And they're doing, really everything, as I say, they can do in order to get Epstein off the front page. Just everything that they can do. And if you don't think, and I mentioned this earlier in this show, if you don't think that Trump feels the pressure on this, yeah, he's in a paranoid bubble. There's no doubt about it. He's surrounded himself with people, much like any dictator does. Hitler is certainly one of these, not the only one. Putin is certainly one of these. You should see the entourage about him. You should see his honor guard every time he walks into a room. Just ridiculous. And, Hitler is one of these where it's, ja, mein Führer, dear leader kind of stuff. And that's the way it goes. Like I said, Putin is the same. Xi, the veritable emperor of mainland China, is the same way. The little rocket man, Kim Jong-il, same way. All dictators are the same way. And Trump has made no bones about the fact that he admires these guys. And it's evident that he wants to be like these guys. I talked on the last show, I believe it was, how he, in his first administration, he affronted the Queen of England, royalty. Now, if you want to talk about forms of government, we talk about oligarchies, we talk about fascism, we talk about republics, we talk about democracies, we talk about all these things. If you want to talk about autocracy, the Queen of England is an autocrat. She's the government. Everything that Parliament does has to be taken to the Queen. If the Queen says no, it doesn't matter. So that's an autocrat, and that's what Trump wants to be. The Tsar of Russia, Tsar Alexander, he was an autocrat. He was the government. Anything he said was the law. So that's autocracy. He affronted the Queen of England, the sovereign, by stepping in front of her. And once again, on his second visit, he once again stepped in front of Prince Charles. And you've just got to think that these people are just gritting their teeth in order to get from him because of the awful thing that happened to them with Brexit and Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, where they basically withdrew from the European Union. And they're really being impacted. And it's a negative thing, which is why it's a cautionary lesson with regard to the Trump regime, which is in its own way. And I'm not equating the removal from Brexit with what Trump is doing, but it's It's the penury of the British nation, and it's the penury of the United States that they are after, that these rich men are after. And there is no other estimable, and I use the word loosely, there is no other estimable thing that they're trying to do. They just want the money, because there's a big pot of money there. There's all sorts of big pots of money, and they want it. That's simple. That's all it is. And, as I said, Trump has all these people around him, and, they're enabling him. They're holding his coat. You have ideologues, scary guys, like Steve Bannon, who talks with Kevin Roberts on his show. Kevin Roberts is another ideologue who is the one who basically is behind the Federalist Society Project 2025. And Federalist Society masquerades as a conservative organization. They're not. They're reactionary. They're fascist. Talking in terms of the fact that this is a second American Revolution and that it will be bloodless, but only if the left allows it to be, and how this is just insanity. So in other words, what does the left mean, for example? Anybody to the right of Genghis Khan, is that what the left means? And if you oppose this in any way, as the great movie with Daniel Day-Lewis, There Will Be Blood, is that what it is? So, come on. But Trump is feeling the pressure. He's begun to direct his corrupt attorney general, Pam Bondi, to prosecute and go after all his rivals, as he supposed, and he's been shown on a video clip, clutching Pam Bondi's shoulder, saying, you have to do it now. There's just no more time left. We have to go after it. We have to go after them. And of course, Jim Comey, former director of the FBI, he's about to be indicted criminally. And this is just one of many examples. And you're going to see these things. Because we have a man-child illegally in charge of the government, facilitators who are willing to hold his coat for the sake of learning how he did it so that they can take their turn later. And they can't have their plans revealed. They can't have opposition. This is why they got rid of Kimmel. Because he said, and this is comparatively benign what he said. He just said that ever since the Charlie Kirk assassination or murder, MAGA has been doing everything they could. That's all he said. But this backfired on them, and there's going to be a problem. And Kimmel, of course, is back on the air now, and it's going to be interesting to see how they get around it, even after Kimmel is back on the air, because at some point, and it might have been just right after they prevailed upon the FCC or ABC to fire Kimmel and FCC to withdraw whatever licenses for broadcasting ABC has, and this oligarchical moron and this other thing I want to point out to you, these people, you think they're smart. And I started off the show and I kind of talked about this at the beginning of the show. You think they're smart. You think they're educated. You think they're reasonable. Oh, they just hold a different political view. Yeah, I'll tell you what their political view is. It's plunder. It's plunder of the assets of the government. It's using the United States government as a cash machine. They're not. They're like gang thugs who say, we can do this. And this is one of them. And who say, we can do it like a thug. Ted Cruz recently, who, I hold no brief for at all, recently said this. He said, this is like a thug from a movie. Oh, he said, you got a nice bar here. It'd be a shame if anything happened to it, because they're running a protection racket. So he said, we can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. And these oligarchs, they own all the broadcast networks, virtually all. They own all the media, virtually all, because it's a necessary part of their plan to corrupt the government and take down the government of the United States and completely suborn it and you, the people who listen to this broadcast, to their thuggish gang desires and to bleed you dry. And this is why I say, when I say the corporate-controlled media, that's what I mean. They have failed to deliver. The things I deliver here at Politics by Jake, it's your only alternative almost. Cheap plug, Politics by Jake, Monday and Friday, 7 a.m. Your only alternative is to listen to shows like Politics by Jake. And, there are several of us out here. Because I'll tell you the things that they won't tell you. And you're hearing them all of the time. I've been on the air for a long time, since actually 2016. But in this iteration, since about 2021. And you're hearing them at this very moment that I speak to you. So they had to it didn't work because they realized something, and I'm about to tell you what it is. They had to put Kimmel back on the air. And this is a victory for free speech because there was a great hue and a great cry and a great civic uprising like David Brooks talked about in the quote that I read towards the beginning of the show. But these guys are like the loyal opposition. They never quit, and they won't quit. And they do have a plan. And when you hear Trump speak ominously to Pam Blondy about prosecuting all his rivals, it's a sign that it's time to circle the wagon. And that's kind of how you know that it's working. It's time to circle the wagons. It's us versus them type of thing. And you have to interpolate, of course, although Trump really does great because he says on basically for national or worldwide consumption, he clutches at Pam Blondy and says, we've got to do it now, there's no time left. That's pretty good. Thank you, Donald. Appreciate that very much. You're showing us just exactly the paranoia and the fear you have. So it's circle the wagons, Trump versus them type of thing. And you, like I said, you have to interpolate out into what Trump fears. The next step is that there will be fair and free and unimpeded elections in November of 2026. You've heard me say this also, and I'm going to keep saying it. You've heard me say, don't worry about the ones in 2028. Don't worry about the election in 2028. Worry about the one in 2026. Because statements like what Trump is on record as saying, and it's easy to find, just go to your search engines. We are blessed in this way. This is not the days of Dan Rather and Walter Cronkite, where you had to rely on what they say. You can research this for yourself. But they realized something. And this is what they realized. That if the Democrats take power in 2026, the exact same things that they are doing to restrict freedom of speech could be done to them as well. Fox News, One America News Network, Newsmax, and so many others could be taken off the air. They could lose their licenses. Because, like the old saying goes, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? And they don't realize it, and they didn't realize it. President Biden, because the case with regard to executive immunity came down in 2024 while Biden was the president. And they didn't get it. And this is, like I say, don't attribute a great amount of intelligence to these oligarchs and these rich men whose only desire is to plunder the government and to plunder you and to plunder the world, if in fact they could do so. It's just the money. That's all it is. It's just the money. But the same thing, and in other words, Biden could have had Trump arrested. He could have had Stephen Miller arrested. He could have had Steve Bannon arrested. He could have had all these things done that Trump is doing now in many cases. Indict them criminally, have them arrested, have them sent to, some South American hellhole or something like that. He could have had all of these things done, but he didn't do it. He had the power. And they still don't realize, but they came to realize. And as soon as they did it, I think it was about as soon as they did it, they realized the mistake that they had made. And so Kimmel is back on the air. And it's an unfortunate, but it's a cautionary tale. And this came out okay. And I think that the stations now, because late night TV is kind of dying as a medium. But now these stations are hoist on their own petard. These oligarchs are hoist on their own petard. I don't know, they don't mind paying the money, but they're going to have to pay the money, and they're going to have to keep these unexpected bastions of free speech on the air. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. If you think owning things in your own name keeps you in control, think again. In today's world, lawsuits, taxes, and predators are everywhere. That's why the smart money hides in plain sight. We help you to build legal firewalls, LLCs, land trusts, private contracts that protect your assets while keeping you invisible. Call Twain Consulting today at 310-997-2204. Find us on Facebook at Twain Consulting. That's facebook.com/Twain Consulting. Protect what you've built before someone else takes it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Are you tired of the noise and the spin? Do you want the real story behind the headlines? I'm Jake, and this is Politics by Jake, where I tell you what they won't. And now we're going even deeper, and I need your help to keep doing it. Join me on Patreon and support independent political analysis that doesn't pull punches. You'll get insider breakdowns, you'll get bonus clips, and first access to new content. So go to patreon.com/Politics by Jake. That's patreon.com/Politics by Jake. No filters, no fluff, just the truth. Let's do this together. Look around you. The systems are failing. The currency, the court, the Constitution. And no one is coming to save you. You feel it. You see it. But you've been told to ignore it. This isn't paranoia. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's collapse. Designed, accelerated, and now unavoidable. So what's your plan? What happens when the banks close? When the grid goes down? When they come knocking and you have nothing protected, nothing structured, nothing left. You don't need a bunker. You need a protocol. The collapse protocol is the plan for people who still think clearly, who want to live, thrive, and protect what's theirs, even in a world gone mad. You don't have time. You don't have backup. But now you have this. Collapse protocol from Twain Consulting before the end begins. Contact us as soon as you can. Facebook.com/Twain Consulting or call us at 213-465-0639. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake to tell you you're not crazy. The system is rigged. Help us say it louder, won't you? Join us at patreon.com/Politics by Jake.